Greetings. Thank you for joining me. My name is Tadashi Byers. I'm going to be doing a little art for you today, and what I'm going to be drawing is I'm drawing a picture with my Rapidograph Koh-I-Noor pens today. These are a couple of pens that I've had for a while. I used to do a lot of music copying and writing music, and I used to use these kinds of technical pens for that. I have a couple of these, and I have some Rotring isographs that I used to use. My father, actually, I inherited them from him. And one of the things that I enjoy doing with them is to draw. Every day I try to draw a picture of something, and I always want that picture to be completed within a certain time frame, about 40-45 minutes. I call them my lunch lines because I try to get them done before I'm finished with lunch. And sometimes there's a little too much in them, and sometimes there's not enough, depending on what I was doing for lunch. But this is a picture of some memories that I had of my old haunts back in Malibu. When I was a young boy, we lived in this idyllic place, and it was beautiful. We were just a few blocks from the ocean, and there really wasn't anything between our house and the ocean except one or two neighbors' homes. But if you turned around and looked up the mountain, you could see up the mountains, and at the very top of the hill there was a house. There was a little cinder block house. It was a little green and turquoise house, very low, low slung, and that's where Mrs. Kim lived with her son Ethan. And I went up to their house a couple of times when we were carpooling to school, and it was just so windy and cold. I marveled that they could keep any shrubs or trees in their yard at all because the wind was so fearsome. But that's the reason why they had a flat-roofed house made out of cinder block. And it was quite something, quite the drive to get up there, too, to go up the mountainside. And in a couple of years later, Rudd Weatherwax bought a large parcel of land right next to there. It's actually across the street. And he built a large kennel and a dog run, and we could see that big green dog run and the kennels with the red roofs. And Ethan was a big fan of Lassie, and so it was like a dream come true for him. And he got to go to see the dogs and feed the dogs, and it was one of his first jobs was helping to take care of the beautiful dogs that he had up at that kennel on top of the mountain. A few years later, there was an architect who moved into Malibu. He actually designed the steps to the local gym that we had at our junior high, and he decided that he was an industrial designer, and he decided he wanted to start building homes. So he actually bought an old house, and he renovated the house and then built this very modern garage out in front of the house that was detached, and it had a second floor with windows that faced the setting sun, so he could work in this studio separated from the house. And it's where he did all of his drafting and designs inside that studio on the second floor. When they sold the house, the new neighbor who had moved from Beverly Hills came out, and they built this ridiculous wall in front of the house, and we all would make fun of it. It was so out of place in our neighborhood. No one had a wall. We had maybe a chain link fence or some board fences. There were a lot of horse properties around there when I was a kid, but no one had this 8 or 10 foot stone wall around their house. It looked really out of place. It should have been at Disneyland. But things have changed. If you were to go there today, up into Malibu Park area, you would see a lot of homes that are now surrounded with massive walls. It wasn't like that when I was a kid. Everyone was a little more at ease, I guess. It was more of a community. There were still a lot of old-timers who had been now retired in Malibu for years and years. And then there were some newer people who had moved in. And one of those people, he was an engineer. His name was Ron Neswald. He had 3 daughters and a son. He and his wife Dee rented a house at the end of our little cul-de-sac, and of course Ron was a genius, and like most geniuses, he was mad as a hatter. And I used to enjoy playing with his daughters. We were all about the same age, and we'd go hiking in the mountains, and we would go down to the beach, and we had a beach house in Paradise Cove as well as our house up on the bluff. And so we would all go down to the beach house and spend weekends and summers. And one of the things that Mr. Neswald would do was he had 3 cars. He had 2 sedans, and then he had a station wagon. And I asked him once why he had 2 of the same car, and he said because he used parts from one car to keep the 2-car sedan running so that he could drive it to work. And I remember every 2 weeks he would pull in on Friday night after he'd been working, and he would open the hood of the station wagon, which wouldn't have moved at all because he needed to take the intake and the carburetor off of his coupe and put it onto the Ford station wagon so that he could drive the family on a family outing into town to go visit relatives or go to the movies or whatever they were going to go and do. Mr. Neswald, he was a nut, but they lived in this beautiful modern house, and it was a gorgeous house. But Mrs. Neswald, unfortunately, she had lupus, and she used to like to do a lot of her own gardening, and they had geese, and we would get the goose eggs, and she would cook them, and we would go hiking in the mountains a lot with the kids. And Mrs. Neswald, one day, she decided that she would send us all on a mission. She sent us up into the mountains to go and find yucca plants. And we had to bring the yucca plants. We had to dig the yucca plants up. Now, we were like 8 and 12 years old. So we went trotting up into the mountains with our shovels and our picks and our hose and our bags that we were going, and we tromped up into the mountains, and we found some yucca plants, and we brought them back and transplanted them next to their house in the vacant lot that was right next door. Eventually, Mr. Neswald would want to buy the house that they lived in, but the owner wouldn't sell. And so he ended up buying the house that was actually right next door to this. And then Mr. DeAngelis, the architect, bought the house and the lot, and he pulled up our victory garden, our yucca plants and our tomato plants and our goose nest and everything else that we had there, and he built another house and then heavily remodeled the old house, and you'd never recognize it today, but that was always one of the funny things. Mr. Neswald on a Friday night trying to change the carburetor on his car. Yeah, there were many, many things like that. Malibu was a fun and interesting place. We had a good time. Well, unfortunately, I forgot to make sure the battery was fully charged on my camera, so you do not see me use the .7 pen, but I do use the .7 to put in details like the power lines and other things. It kind of cuts the image in half, unfortunately. This is a very noisy image. I guess that's what happens when you take 3 different memories and try to put them all onto the same piece of paper. Well, thanks for watching.